Taiwan's support from European nations is growing and increasingly after the invasion of Ukraine. But the Czech Republic's ties with Taiwan date back decades. In today's show, we also discuss some of the big issues facing Europe. Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks, covering the latest global news and analysis from a Taiwan perspective. I'm Yin Khvat. Joining me in the studio to discuss this are Marc, Executive Director of the European Union Centre in Taiwan, and Marcin Jerzewski, Head of Taiwan Office of the European Values Centre for Security Policy, which is headquartered in Prague. And from Prague, I spoke earlier with Czech Republic Senator Pavel Fischer and Chair of the Foreign Affairs, Defence and Security Committee, who was previously Chief of Political Affairs for Václav Havel and formerly Czech Ambassador to France and Monaco. And from Brno, Czech Republic's second largest city, I spoke to China history expert Denisa Hilbertova, a lecturer at Masaryk University's Asia Studies Centre and also a graduate of Asia Pacific Studies at National Zhengzhi University. Let's go now to the biggest stories in Europe. Russia stands accused of using Iranian-made drones to attack Ukrainian civilians and critical infrastructure. Russia and Iran deny this and are also protesting a UN inspection of the drones that have been downed in Ukraine. Marcin Jerzewski, if Russia and Iran have nothing to hide, why the protest?
It is imperative that we understand the controversy related to the alleged deployment of Iranian drones in the Russian war in Ukraine in light of the UN Security Council Resolution 2231. That resolution, passed in 2015, stipulates that Iran is still subject to export controls on advanced military technologies. And as the US, backed by France and Britain, has argued, exports of advanced technologies such as drones would violate the embargo that is in place through October 2023. So it's not merely about the situation in Ukraine. The opposition to a potential UN inspection should be viewed in light of the restrictions imposed on Iran by the broader international community.
Marc, the protest, though, that Russia and Iran have against a UN inspection, why have they protested so strongly if there is nothing to hide? Both have denied using Iranian drones.
It's more like a propaganda. They try to protest and to gain a kind of support to say it's not, what happened is actually being, fake news, created by others to try to, undermine, reputation of Russia. But what they see actually, because Russia actually facing a kind of severe challenges, they need to using a more technical way to actually handle the war. So they have to, using a drone, to actually make the war more visible, because it's small, it's actually, when it's attack, it's very visible and it's very inexpensive. So I mean, if the Russia have, this kind of image, then they will have a more, civilian, casualty might be blamed. So I mean, Russia don't want, this kind of image being broadcast to the international society to show that, they are, try to attack the civilian. So I think, that's why.
So you're saying that it basically paints them as being guilty?
Right. Of course, they try to avoid, an accusation, that could be blamed, Russia should be responsible for all the civilian casualty. If it's a special military operation, shouldn't be attack the civilian. Instead of, it should be focused on the military facility something. But the drone actually designed not aiming to the military facility, but aiming to a kind of indifferences attack, and mostly would be those civilian residents.
Marcin, so Marc agrees that there appears to be something to hide, and this is why they must prevent a UN inspection. Let's talk in comparison about China, which has been very careful about the support that it lends to Russia in its war over Ukraine. And also, we know here in Taiwan that China itself has used drones to come into Taiwan's air defense zone and in its grey zone warfare against Taiwan. So it doesn't appear to be supplying weapons to Russia.
Russian belligerence in Ukraine is a double-edged sword for a regime in Beijing, because on the one hand, as Marc indicated, Russia has demonstrated that it is rather vulnerable in this conflict. The aggression that began on February 24th wasn't a blitzkrieg, rapid war, as Moscow might have hoped for it to be. So the vulnerabilities that Russia is exhibiting, that Marc alluded to, could potentially be an opportunity for Beijing to really consolidate its standing as a major partner amid the growing strategic convergence between Moscow and Beijing. On the other hand, Beijing, in shaping its rhetoric of international outreach, is emphasizing its commitment to territorial integrity, often to lay the foundation for explaining its own territorial claims towards Taiwan, towards the locales contained within the 9-dash line defined by Beijing. So what is perceived by the international community as a violation of territorial integrity of Ukraine is therefore not an action that Beijing can openly support. And I think that in this calculus, the maintenance of Beijing's claim about the importance of territorial integrity is the more important component. That's why we are not seeing open support towards Russia in the form of weapon sales or arms deliveries.
Marc, what sort of support, therefore, is Beijing giving?
Beijing's actually is kind of in dilemma. Russia is a very important partner. Then while they're facing the U.S.-China confrontation, they need a good, reliable partner. And Russia is in trouble, so we also expect China can show the support. But as I can say that you talk about the integrity of territory. It's not that easy to have a black and white and fully support Russia or keep a neutral way. So I think China is very cautious to dealing with the Ukraine issues. You can tell that they didn't very openly, as before, fully support Russia. They keep a little bit cautious on the stand, but still supporting Russia. In trade relations, try to support Russia, not security side, but more like a financial or trade relations to keep China to keep the China-Russia relation in a positive way. At the same time, help Russia can survive in all the blockade or the sanctions from the Western world.
Vladimir Putin has announced martial law in the 4 regions that he claims to have annexed, Marcin. What will this mean for the Ukrainians living there?
I believe that Ukrainians living in those territories have already seen the brutality of Moscow's imposition of its own rule on these territories. We have seen it very clearly, for example, after the new school year started and where Russia sought to plant its own teachers and its own curricula in local schools. There is definitely a push from Russia to subjugate the populations in those territories to their rule, and I believe that the martial law that was imposed is more symbolic than practical. Those places have already felt the burden of the ongoing war, not a special military operation, and that formalized status is only sending another signal to people living there, especially Ukrainian people, that Moscow is not willing to tolerate crackdown, that it's not willing to tolerate bottom-up resistance.
Is it a sign that Russia is losing control?
I do believe that it is a sign that Russia is losing control. I think that it is a sign of growing vulnerability. We talked about Russian vulnerability when we talked about the deployment of drones. I think that it is another piece of the same puzzle of Russia struggling to achieve its objectives through what they call the special military operation.
Marc, Taiwan has its own experience of martial law about 40 years, ending about 40 years ago. Can we use that experience to understand what might be happening in these areas, what might be to come?
I think, probably 2 cases cannot be that easily compared. But I think, just as Marcin say that, to have a martial law actually try to strengthen the control over the regions, make sure there's no rebellions, can undermine the occupation of Russia or leadership of the Russia in the region. So I think now they actually face a severe challenge from the people and from the Ukraine government. So they want to keep the control over the region. So having a martial law, they can more easily to control the region. I think probably when Taiwan have a martial law, have the same meaning is that using a martial law to constrain the people, thinking, freedom, and also actions, and to make sure the policy can be fully implemented by the central government, means by the 4 regions, local government can fully govern and control the region, and to prevent, they losing more control over the region.
Marcin, Joe Biden has said that, because of the loss of control by Putin, that it is the martial law is basically him going to brutalize the Ukrainians, resorting to brutalizing the Ukrainians. What do you think about that?
I believe that we have already seen multiple tangible pieces of evidence of brutality perpetrated by Russians in Ukraine. So I understand that the rhetoric coming out of Washington might seek to emphasize the I understand that the rhetoric coming out of the White House might seek to emphasize that the situation is becoming increasingly unpredictable, that Putin is becoming an increasingly irrational actor in this situation. Nevertheless, this sort of comparison should not make us lose sight of the atrocities that were already perpetrated, of the alleged war crimes. So brutality, brutalization is not exactly a new component to this war.
So in conclusion, you don't believe that the martial law announcement will really make that much difference on the ground?
Absolutely. I still maintain that this is primarily a symbolic gesture and a signal that Russia is grappling to really stay in control of their operation, of the war.
Marc, now Giorgia Meloni in Italy and now Ulf Kristersson in Sweden are part of a growing number of EU leaders that are throwing their support behind Taiwan in the face of Chinese aggressions. Should Xi Jinping in China be worried about this?
Definitely they should worry because there are more and more European countries there to say it in public that their support to Taiwan. And of course, as you know, that the EU still have a one China policy, and most of the European countries also have a one China policy. But they try, used to be, they don't want to say it in public, but now they want to say it in public to show the support to Taiwan. But at the same time, they also want to explore the possibility, to actually have a more cooperation with Taiwan. So, at the same time, it's a kind of support democracy and the value. But another side is that they also want to be visible, to Taiwan that, both sides could have a more, cooperation. It's a signal also to Taiwan that we now are not afraid of that China. So just come to talk with us, since.
So what's brought about this change, Marc?
I think, one of the reasons is that the European country or EU also feel the threat of China. Not only the One Belt One Road or 60 or 70 plus 1, is old mentality of China. Change through the trade or engagement basically did not work. Since President Xi wavered his turn. There's no limit of a turn. It's a kind of big shock to the European leaders that they probably still have some pinda hacker. Think that go through the kind of engagement we can change China, but we go beyond the turn limits. This is an emperor type. So they think that if we don't start to change our mindset, that we are facing more assertiveness from China. Then we have compromised more. So you can tell that from the economic competitor, systematic rival, you see the EU actually. Try to define China more like a threat instead of a competitor.
Marcin, so this is the opposite of what Xi Jinping wants. In his work report, he talked about, presenting a China that was credible and respected. How is it going so wrong?
I believe that the approach of Wolf warrior diplomacy has really undermined credibility of China in the eyes of the international community, also European countries. The events that we have recently seen at the Chinese consulate in Manchester, even though the UK is no longer a part of the EU, resonate quite broadly across the continent. But on that point of the growing support for Taiwan, I think that it should also send a warning message to Taiwan. We are celebrating the growing support that is coming out of the European capitals. The positive dynamic that started in the eastern part of the continent and is now visible from Rome to Stockholm, as you're pointing out. But Taiwan and its government really needs to ask itself a question. How can we make sure that this dynamic is sustainable? How can we make sure that we are not as vulnerable to electoral volatility as we appear right now? Because this support is inherently a product of electoral arrangements, turn to the right, if I may, that we are witnessing in Europe. Ulf Kristersson and his Moderaterna party, the liberal conservative party in Sweden, have been voicing support for Taiwan for years. And for example, in Czechia, the parties of the center-right have also really claimed ownership of the legacy of positive dynamics that date back all the way to presidency of Václav Havel. However, Taiwan needs to make sure that within the constraints of European countries' respective one-China policies, it is able to institutionalize those ties so that Taiwan can be viewed as a partner in a long term and not only in 4-year or shorter periods between elections when the parties that rule the European countries happen to be supportive of Taiwan.
So what do you think about the activity so far then? The sort of the trade visits, out to Europe and the many visits that come to Taiwan. Is there more that we should be doing beyond that? When you talk about institution building, you're talking about the setting up of actual offices.
I'm talking about setting up of offices. I'm talking about signing agreements or arrangements. I have seen a lot of positive movement in that direction. So, for example, many European countries sought to institutionalize mechanisms of legal and judicial cooperation with Taiwan, which is also very important for economic ties because lack of rule of law creates political risk for investors. And that's also one of the reasons why a growing number of investors are reconsidering whether they want to continue doing business in China or are reconsidering the scale of their operations in China. So that's all very important. But let's take a look at the case of Lithuania, for example. It's absolutely fantastic that Taiwan initiated the investment fund to help Taiwanese companies invest in that important emerging partner. It is great that we are seeing more and more visits. However, Taiwan and Lithuania still lack an agreement on avoidance of dual taxation, which is a very basic instrument to propel economic interactions between two countries. So without that foundation, institutionalized foundation, Taiwan remains very vulnerable to results of elections in democratic European countries.
Marc, so what's standing in the way of what Marcin is saying, that very basic taxation rules, so the basis of what we need for business?
All agreement you need to go through a kind of negotiation and discussion. It takes a while. Not all the country have waiver double taxation agreement. Not all the country have the working holiday scheme. I think we Taiwan try very hard to engage with European country. Then we step by step, some countries are willing to do even the judicial exchange, corporations. Some is willing to work in holiday. So there are different schemes, among these European, EU member states. There are 27 member states. So one by one, each member state can learn the lesson from others. Why would they negotiate with one country? Other country can learn from the negotiation process. And Lithuanian, because it's a the new friend into Taiwan. So take a time. But I fully agree with Marcin. Actually, institution arrangement is important. Otherwise, it's only one time show. After that, nothing left. So how we can consolidate the cooperation? We have to make the people in Europe feel that Taiwan really can help. It's not only the slogan. It's very easy to say Taiwan can help, but how? and whether you help feed in their interest. Then at the same time, we want to enhance the cooperation, what kind of cooperation we can offer to them. So I think it's important, but all need to go through a negotiation, then to figure out what's the common interest or best priority for each other. So sign MOU is the first step, but it's more important is that go beyond the MOU. What's exactly the stakeholder, how's the partner which is involved, then who is the counterpart, then how we proceed in a very clear schedule. Then the European country can expect, when we can do this, then I can explain to the voter, the Taiwan really can help, because in 2 years we will have this agreement, then this cooperation. Then the voter will continue to support their government. See, it's really a good cooperation and the relationship. It's really a friendship between Europe and Taiwan.
Okay, thank you. Now, the Czech Republic was the first EU country to supply Ukraine with tanks in early April, at a time when most European countries were holding out, sending heavy weaponry to Kyiv. Earlier, I spoke with Czech Senator Pavel Fischer, chair of the Foreign Affairs, Defence and Security Senate Committee. Fischer previously served as Chief of Political Affairs for former President Václav Havel. He was also Czech ambassador to France and Monaco. Senator Fischer told me why his country was willing to be the first to send armoured vehicles to Ukraine.
Try to highlight 2 or 3 highlights from our own history. When the occupation of Europe in 30s by Nazi Germany was about to be prepared to be realized, Czechoslovakia was one of the first countries on the list. And at that time in Munich, it was 38, superpowers of the world at that time decided that for the sake of peace, Czechoslovakia would give up its territory in favor of Hitler, of Nazi Germany, and that by this way we will preserve the peace in Europe. You know the result. The peace in Europe was impossible to preserve, and it was a first compromise of democratic countries with Nazism that we can have as a highlight, and which wounded the Czechoslovak identity at the time. At that time, our militaries were ready to fight, and they cannot fight because political leadership told them to stop and to give up. And this lesson is extremely deep in our hearts and in our mindset. But second highlight was maybe 68. Many people recall the Prague Spring in 68, when Russian and Soviet and Warsaw Pact, to be more precise, militaries occupied Czechoslovakia because our Communist Party was too liberal for Kremlin. Another very harsh lesson from the history, when our country was militarily occupied by Russians and its allies. So I think that for many reasons, Czech public opinion was ready to help. And when we saw the images at the TV, many people said, oh, they are back. The Russians are still occupying and killing innocent people. We have to help. So I think that on this bedrock, many political leaders succeeded to convince the Czech Republic of today to engage, and to engage extremely quickly, because our own freedom and sovereignty is at stake also.
Pavel, I want to move now to Taiwan. The Czech Republic was one of the first European countries to move closer to Taiwan. There was the sort of landmark visit by the speaker, Milos Vystrčil, in 2020, and he channeled John F. Kennedy in his speech to Taiwan's parliament, saying, I am a Taiwanese. Could I find out from you, is there a difference in support in the Czech Republic between the parliament, the administration, and the citizens?
When I go back to this historical visit of our chairperson or speaker of the Senate, I see myself preparing the visit and discussing with my president whether visit or not and at which cost. At this very period of time, the Senate was blackmailed by Chinese proxies and by Chinese embassy in Prague in Czech Republic. And it was not only by words, but also by very special text on the letterhead of the Chinese Communist embassy here in Prague. So this meddling into internal affairs put completely all the sentiments apart, and we had to protect our democracy, our democratic institutions. And by doing this, we succeeded to build a very strong coalition across political partisanship, maintaining very high the sovereignty of our parliament and inviting our chair, our president, our speaker to visit Taiwan. So it was also Beijing who helped us to shape this consensus, which was extremely strong. And in terms of sympathies, many people in the public opinion read it properly and they said, yes, this is the moment to say the truth, not only about the democracy in Taiwan, but also about the methods of blackmailing we were exposed to by Chinese communist regime. Taiwan is for us an ally. We have witnessed it many times during the pandemic, during the natural disasters occurred in the Czech Republic. And we have a very close feelings of being together as vibrant democracies. By the way, parliaments are sovereign, be it in Taiwan or in the Czech Republic, in Poland, in Lithuania. And this sovereignty, we have the obligation, the noble obligation to share together. So if one of us is under fire, we have to help.
That was Czech Senator Pavel Fischer, chair of the Foreign Affairs, Defence and Security Senate Committee, speaking to me earlier from Prague. Marcin, so Senator Fischer there talks about events in history which explain why they very quickly sent tanks to Ukraine. Can you talk about these incidents?
Absolutely. I think that, just very briefly, Central European countries understand what it means to live under the specter of imperialism, what it means to live under the shadow of regional authoritarian hegemons. And in history, imperial influence came from various sources. It came from Germany, it came from Russia, it came from the Austria-Hungary Empire that for a while ruled over the territory that we now know as the Czech Republic.
But Czech was the very first country. I mean, there are many sort of ex-Soviet bloc countries.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and I think that this is a combination of both historical factors and what I alluded to earlier, which are positive arrangements within the government. So the parties that are currently in government in Czechia have strong, not only pragmatic programs, but also openly allude to ideological motivations in their policy making. And that is also a legacy of Václav Havel, that is a legacy of historical memory that comes from these incidents. So I think that in Czechia, you have historical memory that is at the same time buttressed by good governance and ruled by parties that do not shy away from ideological considerations.
Thank you. Marc, so let's briefly touch on the Munich Agreement and then the Prague Spring, which was crushed by Russia, just very briefly in terms of the giving up of territory and the invasion.
I think those historical memory, the date, the year, 38 and 69, it all remind the Czech people that while they face the communism, they cannot be compromised. They have to stand up to fight. They are the two events actually make the Czech people think that if at the moment we can stand up to fight over communism, maybe the history will be different.
So in 38 and 68, they weren't able to fight?
No, they can't.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what happened?
The compromise didn't bring the peace. The whole Czechoslovakia actually been occupied by Nazi. Then, of course, the Prague Spring didn't bring the reform, but have a more, severe control by the Communist Party. So the dream of be more liberal and also enjoy more freedom, actually the dream died at that moment. So I think, these two historical events remind the people, if you didn't stand up, or you don't support the country who willing to stand up, then one day you will be like them.
Marcin, let's move on to the 2020 Czech Senate visit. And Miloš Vystrčil, the Senate president, invoked JF Kennedy, by talking to the Taiwan legislator and saying, I am a Taiwanese. Now, this obviously invoked the Ich bin ein Berliner speech. Can you tell us what was the significance of these words?
Absolutely. I think that it shows two dynamics. The first one being that Czechia views itself as an important part of the liberal rule-based order, that a part of the rule-based order that was born in the global north, in the political west, and especially during the years of authoritarian rule following the Second World War and strong influence of Moscow in what was then Czechoslovakia. Many people in Czechia were really yearning for a turn to the West. They wanted to return to Europe. They wanted to be a part of that system that in the 60s was very much embodied by the strong United States and the likes of John F. Kennedy. But then at the same time, I think that it also shows that the dynamics in the Taiwan Strait and the threats and belligerence from Beijing vis-a-vis Taiwan do not exist in a vacuum. They are viewed as inherently undermining that rule-based order of which I was speaking, and that Czechia recognizes that, and that they see the potential domino effect of a forced annexation of Taiwan or a distortion of the current status quo and the removal of liberties and democracy that the Taiwanese people sought so hard for.
Marc, so Marcin mentioned the democracy and freedom. For you as a Taiwanese, when you heard those words from Vystrčil, what spoke to you?
That's the common value, shared by both sides. It's actually a lot of the country actually put, the value as a lip service, but Europeans really consider that's their core value. That's what they're going to do. Particularly Central and European countries, because based on the history experience, they think that this is not value cannot be trade off. You must insist on what you insist. You must stand firmly on what you believe. So it's really feel touching when European come to Taiwan, want to share their support and share their value and their experience with Taiwan. It's really good.
Marcin, can we just briefly go back to Kennedy's speech? So why was it that Kennedy was saying, Ich bin ein Berliner?
I think that Kennedy was seeking to manifest that he understands the difficulty of dividing a society, that he understood the difficulty of living in between this imperial contest that I was talking about, and that he was showing that Berliners on either side of the city were being welcomed by the democratic community, by the Western community. Just like nowadays, Vystrčil might be signaling that Taiwan is being perceived as an inseparable part of a family of democratic countries.
Great. Marc, Senator Fischer also says that the Indo-Pacific is important to European security and prosperity. So we often talk about how the Ukraine invasion has pulled together the EU and NATO like nothing else has been able to. Is Xi Jinping, therefore, also helping to pull together East and West?
Definitely, the China's, threat is not only regional, it's more like a global phenomenon. Go through the One Belt, One Road, the people feel that, China is not only doing the business, but also try to have their influence over the world. Then, China didn't take side and then rather to support Russia, put, Europeans are more worried. So the Europeans think that today is a war on the continent of Europe. Then tomorrow might have another war that will be a kind of authoritarian regime fight with democracy. So they have to prevent this happen because they don't want others to be suffer as they are suffering now. So Taiwan become that visible, then think about the Indo-Pacific, strategy. When we talk about the possible confrontation, Taiwan's threat will become the number one. So Europe feel that they should engage more with, those countries who might need their support to prevent, while they, in the future, they'll face a kind of, confrontations from the authoritarian region. So they feel regret they didn't engage with Ukraine, either NATO or EU earlier. If they can do it earlier, probably they won't have this kind of special military operations, or even maybe a less scale, compared to now. So they want to prevent this happening. So they feel sympathy to all the countries who are facing the threat of authoritarian regimes. So they want to do a little bit earlier, preparations and prevention to make sure every democratic country can live without fear.
Marcin, is there's obviously what Marc says in terms of wanting to prevent another Ukraine in East Asia, but is there a little bit more to it? What's the direct link between the Indo-Pacific and then Europeans' own security and prosperity?
This is why I am generally somewhat more cautious when I talk about unity within the European Union when it comes to approaching the treacherous dynamics in the Indo-Pacific and also the China issue. Because in your earlier question to Marc, you mentioned bringing EU and NATO closer together, and it just so happened that this year we saw the publication of two important strategic documents by both the EU, the new strategic compass for common defense and security policy, and the new strategic concept of the NATO. And the language that describes China used in these two documents is actually quite different, with the NATO document being much more assertive and much more forthcoming. Some analysts point to the potential strong US influence in shaping that. However, common defense and security policy and common foreign and security policy of the EU is made by consensus. It requires 27 member states to agree on the language that comes out of Brussels, and that kind of consensus is not always easy to achieve, and that's why no one wants Taiwan to become the Ukraine of Indo-Pacific. I still think that we should be cautious about our expectations with regard to a unified European response towards the difficult dynamics in the Taiwan Strait. I think that were Europe to intervene in case of an invasion or in case of increased Chinese belligerence, that would mainly happen on economic and political planes rather than the more traditional security and defense playing field.
So you're talking about more sanctions, those sorts of...
Yes, definitely.
Mechanisms, okay. Marc, the Taiwan National Defense Industry Development Association, apparently in the Taiwanese media, signed a memorandum of cooperation with the Czech Taiwan Chamber of Commerce, and it's about arms, a potential arms deal. What do we know about this?
Actually, defense industries is very, vibrant in Europe. And it's not only the United States. Europe also have a very big, and complicated, industrial, development. So I think, it's more like consider a sign of industrial cooperation instead of arms sale. I think both sides all have the interest to improve the cooperations on very various industries, not only the semiconductor, but also for the manufacturing or small manufacturing sectors. I think we have to pay attention to that. It's a chamber of commerce, so it's a commerce things, and I think we shouldn't be put too much focus on that, because it's a free society. You can go through the market access or kind of trade. You shouldn't be stopped by any other because of a political reason.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. But the friendship between Taiwan and Czech Republic started decades earlier, even while the country was still Czechoslovakia. Denisa Hilbertova, a lecturer in Asia Studies at Masaryk University, tells me how this connection began as early as the 1940s and for entirely unlikely reasons.
It's quite an interesting story. It started at the end of 1940s and the beginning of 1950s in the 20th century. And it was for quite a simple reason. It was in 1949, the People's Republic of China was established. And also in Czechoslovakia in 1948, just a year before, was established a new socialist communist state. And Czechoslovak communists thought that it would be a very good example to show that Chinese communists won in China without any significant external help. And it was a proof that the communist ideology is spreading in the world and it's becoming the new leading ideology the Czechoslovak population was getting. They got quite precise, for example, geographical information. So when I conducted interviews with people who were subjected to this propaganda in the late 1940s and the beginning of the 1950s, all of them knew very well that the Taiwanese Strait in the narrowest point is 160 kilometers. A very precise geographical information.
And I understand the propaganda actually backfired. How did that happen?
Propaganda started to backfire in the 1970s and mostly in the 1980s. So after the death of Chiang Kai-shek and the economical development of Taiwan in the 1970s, dissidents or Czechoslovak dissidents or Czechoslovak immigrants in the Western countries, they started to observe how Taiwanese economy was significantly growing and started to write about it. They took notice in also the political changes that were happening in Taiwan in the 1980s. And especially that speeded up quite understandably after 1987, after the martial law was lifted and the democratization process was significantly faster. So in the 1987, we can start to see the Czechoslovak dissidents, especially those who were living in Czechoslovakia. They were trying to take those ideas and started to discuss the possibilities how to implement the Taiwanese successful democratization process into Czechoslovakia. But quite frankly, we have to say that those attempts didn't really develop fully, because in 1989, just 2 years after, Czechoslovakia had its own Velvet Revolution, the fall of communism, and therefore those discussions didn't really develop into something that was really put into the practice.
I take from that that the dissidents weren't, in the end, all that influential in terms of the future direction of the Czech Republic?
Obviously, a lot of those dissidents actually became a prominent leading political figures after the fall of communism. So, for example, Václav Havel, our first president, was obviously a very significant person in the dissident circles. We can see that he was a huge supporter of Taiwan during his presidency, and even after his presidency, he was in close touch with Taiwan and Taiwanese representatives. Just not even 2 years after the fall of communism, TECO was established in Prague, Taiwan Economical and Cultural Office, and in 1993, also Czech side established their office in Taipei. There were mutual visits, and even in 2004, Václav Havel and his wife visited Taiwan for a 6 days visit. So it wasn't something short. It wasn't some kind of common international visit. It just shows how dissident they were looking up to peaceful democratization process in Taiwan.
That was Denisa Hilbertova, a lecturer in Asia Studies at Masaryk University, speaking to me earlier from Brno in Czech Republic. Marcin, Václav Havel, the Czech Republic's first post-communist president, he had a special relationship with Taiwan, as Denisa told us there. How important was that relationship for Taiwan, which was being edged out of its international space?
He was an extremely important figure in shaping Czech-Taiwan relations, even when he went against other members of his administration, when he went against the members of his own cabinet. So, for example, in 1995, on the 50th anniversary of establishment of the United Nations, he went against his own foreign ministry to deliver a speech in which he openly advocated for the inclusion of the ROC into the UN system. Very quickly, the foreign ministry was trying to backtrack this statement, emphasizing the adherence of the Czech Republic to its own one China policy. But he was really undeterred in speaking up for the de facto dynamics between Beijing and Taipei, and paying great attention to subjectivity of Taiwan and taking this place outside of the broader umbrella of relations with just China.
And where did that come from? Where did that support for Taiwan come from?
I believe that it came precisely from his role in the democratization movement. The early 1990s were a very exciting time for relations between Taiwan and Czechia, but also the broader Central Eastern European region. Taiwan was very new to the game of engaging Central Eastern Europe. In 1991, we saw the establishment of Dongou Xiaozu, the Central Eastern European section within the European Affairs Division at MOFA. But at the time, Taiwanese diplomats had very little capacity to meaningfully engage with the region. There were no facilities for language training and so on. So those people-to-people ties, the connections based on, for example, the shared experience of being third-wave democracies were extremely important. And then if we look at what was happening in Taiwan and in Czechia in 1970s and 1980s, we can see a lot of parallels. Both countries were relatively prosperous, especially within their respective regional contexts, but also highly repressive. And we see that with, for example, the publication of Charter 77 in 1977 in Czechia and the Kaohsiung incident in December of 1979 in Taiwan. So the timelines were actually quite similar and allowed for the development of such people-to-people ties.
And you mentioned those two incidents, so for our viewers, can you explain how these have commonalities?
Absolutely. So they were related to efforts of democratic